Hey guys, trying something different this time. Usually I record all this, pardon me, widescreen, but that's just because of the format of YouTube. It makes more sense, but the page is really this tall, and I figured, pardon me 1 second here, drop something. Ugh. So I figured, yeah, we just try this. This kind of makes more sense, I think. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think. I mean, I know, obviously, like I said, the format works better. Widescreen, that's what it's designed for, but this way you can kind of see more of the page as I'm working on it. Hopefully not too much of my big head. See, my camera thing is here, but often, yeah, my big head just kind of gets in the way. So, all right, yeah, so this is for an art auction we're going to be doing, and particularly doing this just for that. A lot of the projects that I'm working on, by the time the art auction happens, those projects aren't quite out yet and stuff, so I want to create a couple of things that people will have, specific for that. I don't know, I'm babbling, I'm just going to get into it. So, good old Red Sonja here. I've been reading a whole lot of Michael Moorcock lately, and really just kind of getting back into some classic sword and sorcery stuff, so that's why I wanted to do this. And that's it, so let's just get into it. I'm using Kuratake brush pen. It's mostly just this part of the pen. You buy them separately. I'll put a link in below. One of the things that I like with this pen is you can fill it with your own ink if you buy like a syringe. I'm just going to get into it. I'm going to just start doing the outlines of the figure. Still a little awkward because I'm just trying not to, like, if you could see the way I'm working now, I've got my head tilted around the camera so that I'm not in front of it, but so that also you guys have like an optimum view of the page. If any of you have suggestions out there on how you handle this when you record your stuff, let me know. I'm also like super careful about not smudging my ink because I've had a couple bad experiences with that lately. I was doing a cover for Project Blue Book. I'm sorry, not Project Blue Book, it's just Blue Book. For Dark Horse, and I was really, really happy with the cover. And then smudge, because I'm like working with digital when you're working analog, there's so much more that I love about analog than digital. It's just that there's a practical aspect to it, and one of those things is I can move much faster digitally and not sweat smudging stuff, because the ink can take longer to dry than expected sometimes, and it's interesting how the weather can affect that. It's a rainy day today, so the humidity is higher, so it takes longer for stuff to dry sometimes. It could also make the flow of the ink different coming out of this. It can make it flow a lot faster as well. So sometimes you'll get much thicker ink than you intend on laying down, and then you don't realize it's still not dry. One of the first things I'm doing when I go to inking is I do what I call the coloring book stage, and really it's just the outlines of the character. One of the things that I struggle with sometimes is knowing how much brush I want to use versus how much pen I want to use. when I know I want something to have like a slightly brushier feel. Like I want this to have a slightly brushier feel with a little bit of cartooniness to it, calling back to some of my earlier work. So what I'm trying to do is concentrate on this sort of coloring book aspect, you know, the just doing the outlines of the character, making sure it's really brushy and bouncy and thick. And then I'll do all the little details in the pen. Our sword here is going to have a broken hilt on it. I don't know what it is about the broken sword motif in fantasy. You know, maybe it's because one of the earliest fantasy books that's really influential to a lot of books, a lot of authors, and the genre itself was Poul Anderson's book, The Broken Sword. But I'm sure it has much deeper origins in that. Like Poul's probably calling on something else when he was writing that stuff. But I've used the broken sword. Like visually, it looks really cool. There's something about like sort of the incomplete hero, maybe that calls to. I'm not sure. All right, being careful here with the ink to not smudge anything. Also doing some classic brush stuff as far as thinner line where the light is hitting it, thicker line where there's shadow underneath. Behind her here, her leg is going to be black, so I'm not even concerned about how much the thick and thin works there, you know. One of the fun things when you've been working for a really long time, and this can happen pretty early for some people depending on, well, a lot of factors, but I really enjoy developing instincts, the kind of instincts like you know when to lay a line down without needing to know why you're laying it down, or you put down a line of work that goes against the form instead of working with the form, just because you know, and you just have this instinct of why it's going to work. Or sometimes you lay down a brush line and you know it's going to work really well, and other times you have a bad feeling and you're right, like it just doesn't lay out the way you want it to. And it's really fun that those things, yeah, they just kind of come with working for a long time. Just looking at this, figuring out some of the brush work I want to do and some of the pen work I want to do are kind of overlapping on the outside of the figure. Like I want these things, this sort of like round plate mail that she has hanging, this random, you know, so she doesn't get stabbed in the hip. I don't know. It's a convention of the genre, right? I want this stuff to be in pen, but then like her thighs and legs underneath are going to be in brush, so just pausing a bit to figure that out. I want that line to be nice and thick. I'm also trying to move this brush. I often try to think of my brush as a pen, meaning like sometimes, yeah, I want a really smooth line, but a lot of times I want, see that little tiny change in direction here, you know, right here as well. That feels like a pen thing where a pen is like digging into the paper, so it gives you this sharp direction, and it kind of feels like a little accent of energy. If that makes any sense. You know, sometimes line work or brush work can be so perfect it becomes lifeless, and that's something I always try to avoid or look out for. At the same time, there's some artists whose brush work and line work is so perfect it transcends the need for a naturalistic vibe of it. Like I remember early on in my career, one of my big influences was Brian Stelfreeze and the Gaijin Studios crew. And they were into such perfect, controlled lines, but in a stylistic way that made the line work even more alive than the actual subject. I don't know if that makes any sense. So that's a different approach than this, and I've definitely changed over the years. But that was something I've always loved, and I still to this day when I look at Brian Stelfreeze's line work, like his inks, it's just mind blowing, you know. But other times, especially in these digital ages, and maybe it's a personal choice, so you know maybe this is unfair to say, but often to me, um, line work these days, especially digitally, can fall flat. And that doesn't mean that the art's not good. It doesn't mean that the storytelling isn't there and that you know I don't still enjoy it. But there's just this intangible thing. Probably comes down to taste. So um, yeah, because I'm sure a lot of the stuff that I like and that I enjoy and that I admire, other people don't for the same reason. You know. Okay, so Sonja's carrying this skull on the back of her head. This is a image motif that I've been working on since Hammer of the Gods. I want to work it into a story sometime. Somebody traveling with a giant skull strapped to their back. Maybe if I can find an outlet like one of these kind of Michael Moorcock kind of things, would be great. That'd be fun. Speaking of which, I love to do Elric. Elric, there's news stories or adapting old stories. That would be so fun. And as I always say in these videos, I get kind of rambly. Figure it's a little bit better than just complete silence, I think. If I can hear somebody say, just shut up and draw like. Yeah, so I can get rambly, I'm sorry. Because I'm drawing and thinking at the same time, so I don't know what I'm saying all the time, it just comes out. Alright, well, I still have more of this sort of brushy vibe that I want. I'm going to leap into some of the pen work right now. Some of my favorite pens to work with. This is called a Bimoji pen. It's a brush pen and it's got this tip and it just has, it can get a lot of really good variation out of it. Like I'll probably do a lot of the scale arm with this because look at that, isn't that nice? And what I do is when I first use it, there's a pretty good sharp tip on it, which dies after a while, you know, just from use, but it's still a good brush pen. You just can't get quite the same fine detail. So that I'll mark up the lid, the cap, so I know that it's not like a fresh brush pen, you know. One of my other favorite tools is Pigma Microns #1 for super fine detail. Weirdly, I don't have it out. It's actually this is a 01, but there's a #1. It's just a 1, which is a nice thick brush, which is similar to the Bimoji pen, which I use a lot. I just don't have them. And then weirdly, these are really my two favorite pens, the Uniballs, just old-fashioned Uniball pens. I just like the line quality. It's a little more robust than the, was it bleeding a little bit? It's a little more robust than the Pigma Microns, but it gives you that same sort of effect. There's a nice edge to it. You can even get slight variations. I know that my hero Mignola uses, you know, a lot of the Pigma Micron pens, a lot of the #1s, I believe. And this has a similar effect. So often when I'm, you know, letting my fanboy flag fly, that's sort of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of Mike's line work. And speaking of taste and stuff, like I was talking about, like really fine lines and stuff. You know, obviously I'm a big fan of Mignola. I'm fascinated by how he does this almost like a non-inking style. You know, it's just flat lines, and yeah, it says so much. There's so much energy in them. Yeah, and again, it all comes down to taste. You know, sometimes I'll look at like him just drawing. I don't know what you want to call it, a cover or a page or just a panel, and I'm just sort of in awe of like how little is there. and then what is there is often like almost scratchy, and yet there's so much more life into it than you typically see. And for me, more life than what I would typically see in a lot of comics and a lot of artwork. But I think that just comes down to taste. You know, I also really, really like just trying to figure out, when I look at some of Mike's stuff, it's so enigmatic. You know, I can't always figure out why it works. I can't always figure out why I like it. Whereas certain other artists who I love, I don't know, it's easier to just see what they're doing and to admire those steps that they're taking. Yeah, it's weird. He's an enigma. One of my favorite things he did recently was a story called Axor, which was like his homage to some of the sword and sorcery kind of stuff. And it was reprinted in like the Screw on Head 20th anniversary or something like that, and it's a silent story, which I don't think it was intended to be originally. But it's so enigmatic and strange. It reminds me a lot of like when you watch like an old silent film, like this is one called Haxan, which was if you ever seen footage from a silent movie of like demons and witches flying through the air, like really kind of classic, that sort of imagery. It's usually from this movie called Haxan, and it just reminded me of that. Like, you don't quite know what's going on, but it feels right. It feels creepy, and that's what this story was like. All of which, to me, is it's a big compliment. It might be weird to be like, you didn't know what was going on in there, but you kind of liked it. Yeah, I love that stuff. I love like open narratives. Don't explain everything. Don't spell it all out. Don't really like. I know what I was going for here, but I don't really like the bandage going across. It's going up like this. Doesn't quite match with the shadow, so I'll probably end up doing just some more detail in here to make that work some. But I'm not going to sweat it right now. I just want to move on. The outside of her chainmail here. So here's where the Bimoji pen is going to really come in handy. It's with doing all these details here.
Hey.
Hey. Of chainmail, thick to thin. There we go. And what I like about this Bimoji pen too is I can do nice little bits of rendering like this. It's very versatile. Yeah, definitely. All right, this will help me out down here. There you go. Yeah, it's looking good so far. So far, so good. I'm happy. secondary line around these straps kind of gives it a sense that it's like either folding or there's an edge to it, or even actual literal stitching, you know? So the strap coming through here, I'm gonna have to give it some real weight and shape to it so that it feels convincing. Like there has to be like real depth to it, you know. Yeah, and this is what I love about analog. Like I can dig this pen into the paper, and then it just gives so much life to it. All these little tiny bumps in there, they don't quite really register in your conscious mind, but I think you pick them up as you're looking at it, and it does a lot, says a lot, I think. Okay. Don't quite like the way I've laid this strap over her shoulder pad here. It doesn't quite make sense, but it doesn't matter. I think it'll work with the flow of it, if that makes any sense. What I try to do is I try to use good tangents, you know, when one line goes to another and they look like the same shape, because I'm doing like a cartoony and simplified vibe to it. Like I want it to just flow right from there to here, so it'll work out. Let's do her chainmail. Actually, it's technically it's plate mail, right? Or fish scale, I guess. Well, these are kind of uneven. You know, like technically all this fish scale should be pretty pretty much in the same proportion and even. I always have trouble doing that. It's so technical. I love it when my buddy Dave Johnson, I've seen him do it a few times, and it looks like a perfect mosaic of chainmail or fish scale, whatever you call it, right? Mine are less so like that, but that's also okay. Like I'm going to try and work with it. So you're going to see like a bunch of chips and gouges in this, so it feels, hopefully it feels like anything that's out of place, it makes sense. It makes sense that it wouldn't all be perfectly lined up, because it's going to look broken and chipped and used. The other thing I like about this pen is that it can feel this. It can feel like a pen, and it can also feel like a brush. So for this finer detail here, I'm going to go in and Uses thick to thinness to like really help. I can still feel like a brush here. Especially if it was a fresh pen, it would definitely do that a lot better. But I'm kind of just working with the gnawed up end of this as it is. Yeah, let me know how you guys are feeling about the format here. Meaning tall screen instead of widescreen, or whatever you call it. Alright, let's start filling in a little bit of this so we can see. You can see what I see in my head. All the black spotting, I've been doing that for so long. I usually see all the black areas on a page even before I start inking or anything. But I'm also selling the original of this, so instead of taking all this time to fill in black at the end, I'm just going to go ahead now and take care of that. It's the other thing I enjoy about working digitally is I'm not spending time just filling in these little tiny black areas. It's fairly time consuming. Yeah, I think there's like a very slight vague ink smudge there. But I think it's also light enough that it'll actually erase when I erase it. That's one of the reasons why I wear the glove. Not only does it keep lead off of my hands, it stops my fingers from absorbing, my hands absorbing lead. Helps with the smudging. It doesn't always prevent it, but sometimes it'll just get absorbed into the pen as opposed or into the glove instead of getting sucked up. I mean, instead of getting spread on the page. Feels like she needs more shadow on this arm. There we go. Yeah. Dig it. I dig it, says the old man. Yeah, I kind of want to do a couple highlights in here of like. You're seeing a tiny bit of scale through the shadow. It might not work at all. Now it looks like a happy face. Meh, I don't know. I'll leave it for now and see how I feel about it later. Work on his back leg. Let's get to this guy again. Oops. soles on shoes go a long way. Again, it's another technique that, like, I see a lot of my friends, they just kick ass with soles on shoes. And I know that sounds silly because it's such a little thing, but I don't know. Sometimes I see people just draw shoes so great. They have a life of their own, they're bouncy and dimensional. And, yeah. Jason Pearson does that really well. Again, my buddy Dave Johnson. Me, right? I fake it. Also, when I'm doing like this fur and stuff, I purposely like to leave little bits of weight, you know, because it just gives some texture to it and gives a sense that light is bouncing off of different parts of the fur in different ways. Yeah, it just gives it a little something. Here's what this is looking like so far. Oh, that feels nice. You know, and then there's also just like a grit that working analog I can get that I don't quite get working digitally. And when I work digitally, I work really hard to simulate what I'm doing analog. Like even in my head, I sort of play a head game with myself where I'm really trying to convince my mind that this digital analog brush that I'm using, digital brush that I'm using is an analog pen. You know, like I think about like how the brush tip touches the paper versus how this digital pen is actually interacting with the iPad or the screen, you know. Sometimes I like doing fur with pen or brush, but there's a lot of good brushy feel to this, so I'm gonna split the difference a little bit. So a little bit of pen work. Also, what's weird is like, and then a little bit of brushing on top. And then what's weird is, sometimes when you're doing a fur thing, or like, well, like these are, this is like some kind of fur, like imagine like a yak fur or something that's thrown over her boots for insulation, keeps her warm, and it looks cool. Doing every little line and stuff, again, that's great if you're that artist, you know, but what I've noticed is that you get more out of just doing some shapes and than doing every little line that could possibly be from the fur. This is another thing that I learned from my buddy Adam Hughes when he would show me stuff like, that's a weird tangent. Like this is the fish mail, but then it looks like it's going right into this, so it looks like an overextended line. Just do that. I don't know if that's any better. But anyway. Yeah, I remember him showing me hair. Like he was telling me that about hair. Like when you're doing these outlines, not to do all of this sort of like say this is a hairline, like not to do so much like this or anything, but you just want to almost make it like a sculpture. Oh, that doesn't make any sense. But if you look at his stuff, you'll see what I mean. He's not drawing all of the hair and making a thing out of like a bunch of lines. He's actually drawing hair and fur in like these nice solid shapes. into lately. It's doing this kind of like strap right across the foot. I started doing that in Mice Templar, and then I also started just doing it with any character who's got sort of like handmade boots or shoes. And I find these thick, chunky, short lines for rendering. They say something nice about the textures without getting too carried away. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. So originally, I don't know if you can see here, I plan on making this like really dark, but I think it might be too much shading on her leg. Like if she was wearing like leather pants, sure, then I think it would make sense, but it kind of doesn't. So I'm gonna leave it like that. Got our Pole Anderson broken sword here. So I'm gonna do this hand, then the skull, then her head, I think. The other thing that's tough with when you're working analog, I'm sorry, digital, is just how fine and the details you can get. And sometimes that's great, and other times I really want more of this kind of like a chunky, I guess that's the best word I can think of, just some chunky line work, you know, some kind of Alex Tothi kind of vibes. There are other artists I know who work digitally, and they can still do that. A friend of mine, Jason Alexander, like he's a painter, you know. He's big, thick splattering effects and all that. Big brushes, big, chunky, thick brushes, and when he works analog, it looks the same. He's able to carry that feeling across. It amazes me. I mean, that's some real discipline, because there's just so much that the digital work can do for you, or steer you in a different direction that's not quite really you. To have that kind of control is just amazes me. I'm really gonna have to look out for this ink. Like I bet this is gonna take forever to dry in there. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll purposely go over a spot that I know is still kind of damp. So I'll use my glove here. I'll use the wettest spot to see. It looks like it's pretty dry, but even then it still might smudge. But just carefully dabbing it. And then over here I did something, so I'm carefully dab it there. Alright, now the the skull. Yeah, I'm gonna go with this heavier pen here for most of the outline. Just want it to feel chunky. Chunky and sharp, you know. Not too much control either. So I like that it digs in like this and kind of stops and starts and just gives it so much feeling. Because like this feels super smooth. That feels a little too smooth. So like. And also because this skull isn't exactly human-like in its proportions, so I'm going to give it a little fang here, just so I can get away with any not correct anatomy here. Speaking of anatomy, if you want some good anatomy lessons, check out Mike Hawthorne's Patreon. He does all kinds of great tutorials on comics and how he does his pages. He also does really just lessons in anatomy, and I should take some. Because even in my cartooniness, knowing the real deal would help make everything else more convincing. Like, I'm not exactly sure if this part of the skull would really do this, but I want it to, so that it just helps give this feeling of the skull laying on her back. Like, if I knew better about anatomy, I'd know more about what exactly this line is. I just know that there's this shape there somewhere in the skull, so I'm just kind of making it. And in case you're wondering, yeah, I drew this original sketch that you see underneath. I did it all digitally. I did that like just sitting on the couch using my iPad, just playing around. I think Taki was playing Witcher, and I was probably listening to some crazy music. Something fitting for this genre. Some old weird acid metal or something. I think this is going to come together nicely. Okay. Gonna have to be careful down here. This really feels like it's going to take forever to dry. And kind of just like working digitally, I gotta be careful not to get too detailed here, because it'll throw it off balance. Kind of hard to explain. If there's too much detail over here, yeah, it just draws the eye. It distracts from what you really want to be looking at, which is Sonja being a hero. Drinking my coffee. Gotta have my coffee. Alright, I'm going to do the sword real quick because the hair is going to be behind the sword. The swords are fun. And again, chunky. It's had action, so parts that are broken off. That also helps with the inaccuracy of like the shape that I've got going on here. I was very lucky when I was really young. I remember being told that thing that when you're drawing there really aren't mistakes, or if there are mistakes, just work with your mistakes. I'm really, really glad that stuck with me. It kept me from sweating over every detail and being an over perfectionist. Sometimes you could argue I should have worked harder on something, but other times I feel like to just embrace the imperfections. But it's a slippery slope, you know, because you also don't want to be sloppy or anything like that, or lazy, but there's this fine line between being organic and being sloppy. And I've seen that with some artists over the years, like, you know, they'll have like a looseness and they'll embrace it. And that looseness over the years or decades just becomes looser and looser and looser until it gets so loose it just loses something. Loses a magic, you know. And I'm always afraid of that, so I'm always just thinking about it, being careful. Especially, I want to be an artist who not only has a career late into life, I want to be able to draw late into life. Like, so even if I don't have the career, even if things go away, you know, people fall out of favor, or just old hat, whatever. I want to be able to draw for myself, going all the way up to my last days. That's what I'd like. So, that means I want to make sure that I'm always growing, I'm always learning and not getting stagnant. Easier said than done. We'll see. I think I've got another 20 years to draw in me. Hopefully more. Let's go for 30. Turning 50 at the end of the month. It's a weird thing. 50 is weird for everybody. In my case, one of the things that makes it weird was that I broke into comics at a really young age. So I was always kind of the youngest person. My peers were always older than me, editors and all of that. Like, even though all this time has gone by, you know, it's still weird to sometimes go, wow, now I'm that guy. I'm as old as the editors who hired me when I was 17 or 14 or whatever. It's interesting. And then it's all sort of compounded with, you know, these last years. Because we have health issues, the pandemic was pretty hard on us. But even before the pandemic, between 2016 on, it's been a whirlwind of like health issues and some deaths in the family and stuff like that. So what happens is like time just flies by. Like, it really feels like the past 4 years have almost been stolen. Like, I don't know where it still feels like it should be 2019. Not exaggerating, it's just how fast time has flown by recently. So yeah, I'd like another 30, 40 years of drawing. I like how the hair's coming out. It's always intimidating. The hair in the face. Because, you know, that's why usually I start with the face first. Because I feel like if I fuck it up now, that's going to be hard to deal with. Whereas if I made a mistake on the face early on, you know, I can start over. If I had to. Now it feels a little late to start over. Look at the thin to thick you can get with this pen. And it's only better if I was using a fresh one. If I was using one of these like really fresh, the line work here would be even better with the thick to thin. And I do have other ones. They're just not open and I don't want to stop and take the time. another failure of mine is often I'll just deal with what I have instead of taking the time to improve the situation. But at the same time, there's a strength in it, I guess. I think that comes from just growing up poor. When you grow up poor, you learn to deal with what you got, not with what you want or wish you had. And maybe that attitude carried over. Alright. Oh, that ear is huge. Who cares? Nobody's measuring the ear size. This is what I was talking about before. My buddy Adam taught me hair is shapes, it's not individual hairs. It's the shape of the hair. And once I heard that or learned that, I could see other artists doing it. Going, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm sorry, I'm working really hard to keep my big skull out of kind of the camera. I particularly hate it because it's like, not just my big head is in the way, but like, it's just right zoomed up into my hair follicles. It's so weird. Whoops, almost blocked that out. No, I'm thinking of getting rid of this line anyway. Yeah, let's get rid of it. That feels artificial. Yeah, it just needs a little. Yeah, it leaves a weird shape here. Shapes are good, sculpture shape is good, but that feels odd. I'll figure it out. But not right now. Let's just keep moving. Out to you that it should be touched up, or there's something about it that just feels weird. Instead of stopping and torturing yourself over it, just move on. You won't forget about it. So you move on, and then a bit later you'll come back to it, and you'll see what you need to do. Like I improved this area here. Like I wasn't too happy with the way the lines weren't conforming with the leg, and sometimes you don't want the lines to conform with the leg or the lines to conform with the shape. You want to do something that contrasts, but it didn't particularly work here, and I'm not super 100% happy with that detail, but I'm happier than when I started with because I gave myself time to just go away, think about it, and come back. Oh, I'm pretty excited about this. This is looking nice. Yeah, there we go. Alright, now I'm going to be using this pen for the face. It gives, I really like the detail that this pen can give. Give Sonja this nose that's pretty, but also looks like it's been broken at some point. I know a lot of people like the version of Sonja who's basically like a walking pinup girl, and I recognize that's part of the genre and part of, you know, the character's pastiche and, you know, all of that, and I don't have a problem with it. I like her to be a little more rough edged. I want my Sonja to be like, she, first thing you think is that she can kick your ass. Second thing, you realize she's half naked. Third thing, you realize, oh, and she's beautiful. Tiniest bit of out of line there. Right there. Fixed. Looking good so far. Pretty happy. Bet. I know I'm looking at my setup here and I realize that I could probably just lower this. Pardon me while everything shakes, I apologize. I'll lower the arm here. That's a better shot. Sometimes too, this is what keeps me from recording stuff, is it can take a while to figure out like a good camera setup. Anyway, here we are. This is looking pretty good so far. Now I think I'm probably, I don't know exactly how long I want to go here. Still got these rats to draw and the background. Let's just go ahead and fill in the black at least, just so you guys can see sort of the finished figure. Of course, at some point I will see now, but now the camera is like right where my face should be. So speaking of art, and art's growing and changing over the years, you know, earlier my work was definitely cartoonier, but I wonder how much people really notice this. So kind of a conversation I have with Taki quite a bit, where I feel like I've got these different styles, which to me are like really big and obvious, but she's often saying that, you know, people really just see my stuff as, however it's identifiable. I don't think that level of cartooniness really registers with people. I don't know. You wouldn't still say this is very Bruce Timm-y, right? And like, I'm a huge Bruce Timm, especially early on, giant influence on my style. And he still is, but you know, compared to my earlier work on Powers, I've gotten a lot less cartoony. It's still cartoony, but in its own way. It's just in a different, less bouncier kind of, more detailed way. I don't know. What do you think? Like every now and then, I'll purposely do something that feels very throwback to that bouncier, cartoonier stuff. But it kind of takes an effort, to be honest. Although I guess, relatively recently I did Dick Tracy, and that felt like naturally cartoony. Like I was in my sweet zone there of cartoonishness. In fact, I'm going to do another Dick Tracy piece just for this auction. Damn, I love Dick Tracy. That was some of the most fun that I ever had. My only regret with that and that story was that I had this concept I wanted to do basically 2 stories, maybe 3 stories, plus some sort of puzzle, like a fun interactive thing. So those were really fun, the puzzles and stuff, but I think I tried to do too much story in there. Just because, it's Dick Tracy, there's so much I wanted to do. Still worked out, but in the end, I wish I pulled back a bit on doing multiple stories per issue. But of all the regrets I've had in doing books or things, I wish I'd done this instead of that. That's a small one. Oh, this is what I should have done. His fucking mandible, or the top of this thing, should come over her here. That's what I should have done. I did a little bit here, but if this tooth came out here, unfortunately, I don't know if there's a way I can even, like if I extend the line here and then even did shade in there and stuff, I don't think I could pull it off without putting white out on the page, and I don't want to do that. So, well, if this was for print, then what I would do is definitely fix it. Hold on a second. Yeah?
Oh, sorry.
No problem. Just talking, checking in. All right, here we go. I think that's a good time to call it anyway. We got an hour of this. We use some brush, we use some pen. It's all good. Pretty happy with it so far. Well, it's gonna be hard to see turned over. All right, I'll pick up the second half a little bit later. We'll do some of the background. But generally we're off to a good start. Still gonna do more rendering in here and stuff. And yeah, so far so good. All right, yeah, let me know what you think of doing things this way, and yeah, I'll put this all up when it's all done, and we'll put links to the auction when it's time for that, and bada bing. All right, how do I get out of here?